we do this kind of work for people, help them figure out the ideal client profile. We've used, I think, probably every trick in the book. I mean, I'm sure there's a new book being written every moment, right? I think Clubhouse is the book of the day, right? Okay, how do we leverage Clubhouse to do this? But just to talk through this a little bit in terms of how we practice it and some of the tools that we use to do it. You know, maybe I'll start on this. We talked about last week voice of the customer research, and voice of the customer research is one of the really useful ways to get right up close and personal with a client and figure out, do they have a real problem, right? And you can do that through interviews on the phone. Really helpful to actually stand behind them and see how they do their jobs, to figure out, does your product fit into their day-to-day workflow? Does it solve something that takes a significant chunk of their time or make them a significant amount of, extra money? Or let them go home early at night or whatever it is. I mean, unless you're making entertainment products, it's got to make a difference. And so you really got to know that client up close. But at the same time, sometimes clients have lots of customers and lots of data in their CRM, and we'll pull that data and look at it and say, whoa, wait a minute. So these people all seem to churn a lot. These people, have a 5-year, lifetime. Why is there such a difference? What's the difference between these two groups of people? Could we figure that out? Because we want more of the latter group and a lot less of the first group. So, how do we solve that problem using data? And data analysis is another tool. But, once we have an idea of how we can do that, Nate, you have a lot of really interesting outreach tools. I mean, how do you do it? What tools do you bring to bear and processes to this?
Well, I think it starts a little earlier. Like a lot of small businesses who are maybe they've built their business on referrals. They've had some inbound or outbound success, but they're at a stage of growth now where they need to accelerate that growth, and they need to be able to scale what they have. And they're really getting into starting to increase their outbound efforts. Some of the hacks and tricks that we would recommend for small businesses is go back and look at your clients, the last 5 or 10, and figure out what the different attributes of each client is. What's the customer journey? And start writing down who's involved in the process. And then what we like to do is use different tools like Outreach.io, Apollo.io, different outbound outreach tools, and start crafting messages targeted to these different client profiles. It's a very agile, fast, and effective way to put something out there in the market to different personas, get real-time instant feedback based on the data you have already in your CRM and what you already know about your customers, and pivot based on what comes back, whether it be objections from a certain persona or just flat out no's from another, and then evaluate how long one persona takes to close versus another. Look at the cost of acquisition between the two, and it kind of creates a spotlight on who your real best buyer is and what it takes to start moving them through the pipeline from a sales, marketing support, customer service support, and then your sales efforts. And once you've crafted that out, now you can start having some fun and playing with different outbound and different sales channels to see how can we take what we've learned and create growth at scale. And so those are just a few tools from an outbound side that allow you to be able to move quickly, adjust fast, pivot on a dime, and learn a lot of information through the data very quickly about who buys and who doesn't.
Ben, do you want to argue that point and how marketing kind of plays the role in that versus the sales approaches?
Well, I don't necessarily think there's anything to argue, right? But I will say that, the ideal customer profile, we just hammer this home all the time in marketing, and people are probably sick of hearing it, but it's so true. It starts with data. Like it's really not that difficult. In our conversation last week, Jeff said that voice of the customer research, it's so useful that sometimes it almost feels like cheating. And I mean, it's true. there's really no reason to guess. Most of us, we make assumptions about who wants to buy our product and who we think our ideal customer is, because I mean, let's be honest, it's easy. It's easy to think that we know everything about our customer and everything about our market and why they want to buy our product. But until you ask them, you really don't know. Until you dig into your CRM and you look at which customers are churning and you look at which customers took a way longer to onboard than you thought. Everything is up for debate, right? So, and it's so important to align on that ideal customer profile, because everything else flows from it, from your sales outreach to what Nate was saying, also to the marketing materials that you create, and also it informs your product roadmap. If you don't know who you're creating for and why you are creating features and enhancements for your product, then you quickly fall victim to like the shiny object syndrome, which is relying on sales most often to dictate your product roadmap and to close the deal of the day, rather than looking 6 months or 12 months down the road. So it is critical to put in the time now to just create that ideal customer profile. Honestly, just write it down on a piece of paper, hang it on your wall, and every time you go to make a marketing or sales or product decision, just look at it and make sure that what you're doing is serving that group of people. And if you do, that is a really good step in the right direction.
Yeah,
That's great.
Yeah, to add that, Ben, I think something that's often overlooked is the collaboration between sales and marketing. We're one of the big benefits that we have working together is through our SaaS acceleration for companies is, as we're testing and doing measurable outreach, looking at different targeted personas, we're getting real world feedback, leveraging different marketing assets. And as we get that data to see who's responding to what, or what objections we get into, and could really use maybe a data sheet, maybe a customer testimonial, maybe it's a video. But we're up in the front lines from a sales point of view, and collaborating with marketing and say, here's what we're finding. Here's what we're seeing. Here's what the data is telling us. How can you help support us? Here's what we think we need. So Ben, I ask you, when sales comes to you as a marketer and says, okay, here's what we're seeing in the data, here's what we believe we need, how do you determine what's the right thing? What's the next step to be able to provide sales to support them based on who that client profile is?
Well, to be honest, I mean, I think as you said, the handshake, the relationship between marketing and sales is one of the more important things in any B2B SaaS company. There's historically like a lot of tension between those two departments. But when you have a marketing and sales team that works well together and that trusts each other, then it really forms the bonds of a very symbiotic relationship, because marketing shouldn't always have to wonder if what sales is telling them is true or not, or have to read between the lines. Like, sales it's super valuable, the data that sales comes back with, because they are the ones, as you said, on the front lines. They're the ones that are talking to people day in and day out. So if they say that they need a case study or a data sheet, me personally as a marketer says absolutely, like, here's, like, let's try it out. Why not? As long as the the sales team is targeting the right people, and they're not asking for things that are in direct contradiction to our strategy, like our ideal customer profile strategy or our persona strategy, then the more we can test, the better. So I think that relationship is incredibly important, and having that can-do attitude is definitely can make or break a company.
Yeah, let me chime in and wrap this up. I mean, I think, from a CEO's point of view and a growth point of view, well, I tried to pitch your heads together and make you guys fight, but it didn't work. But but it often
Sales
does
and
in
marketing, we like
company.
each other.
And the reason is that if you know who your ideal client profile is, it becomes a North Star for everyone, right? The product team says, that's who I'm building to make happy. That's where I'm adding my value. And marketing says, and that's who I'm trying to drive down the sales pipeline and nurture them into the hands of my sales guys who could close them. And the sales guys go, and they close faster, and my quarter's easier, and I can forecast better, and I have less missteps. And customer support says, oh, and everything's great. And we know how much people we need. We know how long it takes to onboard someone, and everything becomes predictable. Profits rise, all is good. So that ideal client profile, along with, getting the right go-to-market and product market fit, these are like core tenets of a healthy company. And so whether it's your first product going into a market, whether it's your second product going into a market, which is even more difficult than the first one, believe it or not, or you're trying to enter a new market, right? None of these things will work well if you do not have the answer to these questions. So thank you very much for participating today, and great wisdom. Catch you next week.